Okay, so a couple more details to round it off, to round this whole theme that I opened up and shared about today off. And that is, and it's going to be all over the place. It's the only way. I can't do this linear. So also the black helicopters, when they would show up, they would show up literally, they would show up out of nowhere, because otherwise you can hear a helicopter like the other ones. You can hear them approach from kind of further away, and then the sound comes closer and closer. They would literally just always show up in my vicinity, and also they would disappear and they would vanish into nowhere. It's like they were right here, and the next second they're gone, and you can't see them. But it would have to be that that the sound gets more and more and more quiet, but you could still see them somewhere, on the horizon or in some direction. And I'm under the roof, so I should be able to see them. And it was always like, where did they come from and where did they go to? So that's another interesting aspect, because what I believe is that these black helicopters, they don't come out of the I don't even know where here there is, if there is a dam, or if so, where there would be one, any kind of military base, where they would come from. And I believe they use portals as well, but again, those different kinds of portals. Then I wanted to also say that, going back to the story, because when there's so much at once, and I'm also kind of like pressured by the time because it's already taking so long, then there are things that get lost, but they are important. So when I was standing there, I was 4 years old when I was playing in the creek and in my imaginary world, and the Sasquatch showed up. And how did I then later on realize that it was a Sasquatch? Because when I was 4 years old, I didn't know that, and I didn't, as I said, I didn't see it with my eyes, but what I was given is that I saw it like that. I on a different dimension, like there, I still picked up the image of it, and so only at an angle that I consciously couldn't see, but I was recording it. So what was for me was clear, because when you're that age and you're still in your imaginary world, this is what changes then with getting older. It was different to like say, okay, to a rock, imagine, okay, this rock is that, and I'm in this and this kind of a world, and this is what's happening, and I'm this and this person doing this and this, and this being showing up was absolutely real. It was like it stopped me in my tracks, and I looked up, and I was just like smiling and beaming, and we were standing in each other's field. And what it was, and this is what I want to bring across, and what is the same experience that I had when I was a whale, when that lucid dream or reality, when I tapped into that reality when I was a whale, or of the aspect of me that is cetacean, that is whale, is the heart field. So I was standing there with my 4 years old, and my heart field just like, woo, was huge, and it was one with this being. It was like they were meeting, our hearts were meeting, and I was just getting all this love, and I was giving it back, and there was, I don't know how long it went on, but there was this whole exchange that didn't happen over the rational mind, you know. And it's not like I talked to anyone about it either. It was like a beautiful natural thing that happened, and it was always stored in my memory, but I never like reflected on it as a child again, not that I remember. And that came later. And so what came later, how did I come to know that this was Sasquatch? And how did, like, then everything was shown to me through my soul. So all of this comes through soul cultivation and making space for soul. So when I was, and this is why I mentioned these things, because I try not to go into my personal life too much, and I try not to go into detail too much, because that's my tendency, and then it gets too long. But sometimes I notice, that's why I said that, you know. So I'm making my way for 5.5 or 6 years through university. And towards the end of it, you know, I was already so finished with everything. It was just like I had to force myself to continue at some point, you know, because also depression was so terrible. And I had to force myself to continue, because I still believe, okay, I came this far, I put in all of this time, and I still believed that I needed that degree in order to be able to do what I wanted to do. And that was this, you know, journalism, but not in the news, documentary films. And it was all about waking consciousness to, it was already clear to me when I was, you know, even still going to school, that what I was seeing in the news, on, you know, on television, how the world was explained to us, that it didn't match up with reality. And that there was, it was like what I felt I wanted to bring across was to connect all, you know, to synchronicities, to connect the dots, and to show, you know, like the reality behind that whole narrative that was like a cloaking of the truth. You know, I wanted to bring the truth out. I don't know how to better describe it, but it was also like I wanted to bring the light out, and to put it into like really a gross way. It was that I traveled extensively in my life, and the image I got from how the world was explained and brought to us through the news was so negative. And when I traveled, what I came to observe is that humanity is for the most part, so way over, you know, for the greatest majority, and every, you know, 90% or 95% is good, you know, are good people. And it doesn't matter, you know, I was observing this sitting, you know, at airports with people from all kinds of different culture, you know, so different cultural backgrounds, that it couldn't be any more different from my cultural background and mindset. But I could see in their hearts they're good, and we all want the same thing. We all want to live in peace, and watch our children grow, and have, you know, it's not about driving a expensive car and wearing expensive watches. No, it's about having a nice home and good food, and watching our children grow and blossom in peace and freedom. You know, that's what everybody wants. And so anyways, I just saw there was so much wrong, and I wanted to, through documentaries, like, bring forth the truth, which is interesting because it turned out, you know, to be so different. Because so I thought I needed that degree, and okay, that's why. And towards the end of it, you know, I was like, okay, I saved up all this money, and the greatest wish that I have is that I can go swim with dolphins. And I don't care what I'll do afterwards. I even had this really huge offer from a very famous documentary filmer that I could come with him on his next project. And I was very conflicted about it, because that was like, whoa, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, and it's what I want to do. You know, I could learn from a master. He was the one who made the documentary movie on the 17th Karma Pa, and how they found his 17th reincarnation from, you know, before the 16th, when the 16th died, and how that whole system works of the Tibetan orders and so forth. So it's a really, really good, interesting and fascinating movie that took 7 years. Anyways, I felt I couldn't say yes because the calling was so strong, and the most important thing for me is to go swim with the dolphins. And when I had the wish, and I saved up every dime I had, and I worked hard for it while I was doing my studies, I still didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew it was going to have to, obviously it was going to be in the wild with the wild dolphins. And then one day, and this is, now I'm sharing this because this is how magic shows up. This is how your soul speaks to you. So one day there was I saw at my folks' home, I saw a magazine with the cover of a woman swimming with dolphins. Anyways, it turned out that was Joan Ocean. And I read about her. Since 13 years she was swimming with dolphins, and she wrote a book about their communicating with them telepathically, and she wrote a book about that. And I read the book, and already when I opened up that, I knew that's where I want to go, because she took on also groups where she would swim, take people with her, and I'm like, that's what I want to do. And it was very expensive, but I had saved for so many years every dime, and I put every dime into being able to do that, and I did it. And when I got into the water with the dolphins, my whole paradigm was blown out the window. It was like, what was I doing all my life? You know, wasting away in the dungeons, making copies of books and reading books that I knew had no value, absolutely no value. It was all indoctrination and had no truth in them. And but you know, and stealing time, like in the book Momo by Michael Ende, who wrote my favorite book, The Never-Ending Story. Where, you know, it's always the agents of time that are smoking the cigarette. They can only, you know, they're addicted to these cigarettes. They can only survive and keep their bodies if they have a cigarette, because if they lose the cigarette, then their bodies dissolve. And the cigarettes are made out of stolen time from other people. So it's just, it all is this. It's all symbolic, but it's also all real. You know, you just have to open up to the symbolism of it. And when I went into the waters, yes, it was like, that's all I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I just wanted to swim with dolphins. But of course that wasn't possible. However, all that career, you know, I was very dedicated and I was striving, you know, to work my way there and to achieve something. That all went out the window. And it was back to zero. I didn't know, you know, what I was going to now do with my life, but I was definitely not going to pursue what I had planned. Yeah, and so I came back to zero. Yeah, like the bubbles, you know, the portal bubble rings, like, you know, the 0 point. And now we come to the heart space. So, it just. When I was in the water as a whale, in that lucid experience, and what, like I said in the video before, we were making these sounds. It was it was all about the heart space. So the sound was carrying the heart space, and the heart space is ecstasy. This is ecstasy, yeah. So you cannot experience ecstasy without the heart being wide open. And now we come to, at some point in my life, you know, I did, as I mentioned before, I was, had phases of the deepest, you know, like suicidal depression since I was 11 years old. And also completely debilitating depression, like, you know, not being able to do anything, you know, not being able to walk out of even the house or the room for a week, you know, that kind of depression. And what is my heart space? What do I want to say now? How to okay, calm down. It'll come back. Because it goes that I lose it through the frequency when I touch upon that. Yeah. It's okay. Just calm down. You have the time. Completely lost it. Wow. Okay. That is interesting. I completely lost it. It'll come back. Heart ecstasy. Yes. See, okay, there we go. There we go. So because I had this also, not only that, that's not because, but also part of that was that you know, I had a lot of shadow to carry through my DNA and through my own experience. And so there was also these phases and these times where I would numb myself. And I also had these times where I experimented with, you know, induction, so taking something. And there is this drug that is even has that same name, you know, like ecstasy. And I was introduced to it, and then the first time I experienced it, I'm like, I want to experience this alone in nature. And, you know, I am not saying this is what people should do. You know, it's not necessarily a good idea at all, but it's what I had to do for, you know, for this mind-body complex. I needed to go through that, and I needed to do a lot of things that, you know, in a way that I would never do, and that I would never do again, and I would rather not have done. But that's not even true, because all of these things brought me first there to be free of them, and they brought me there where I actually wanted to be, in this space of, in this liberated space of knowing myself, and of a relaxed nervous system. And all of this is, I had to go through that. So so one thing I experienced, because it was like this urge to experience my heart opening again, because it had closed down so badly that there was a time when I was about 16 years old that I was close to calling the ambulance. And I was never someone who was quick to believe in any of that or do that, because I wasn't afraid. But I had so much pain in my heart, and I could not breathe. I literally could not breathe for so long that actually it wasn't me that was close to calling the ambulance. It was my mom, because she witnessed it once, and she was close to calling the ambulance. And anyways, there was this time where, you know, my heart chakra closed down so much, and also the throat, and it was like this need to break it open by force, because that's what that is, you know. It's a drug, so it does it by force, It doesn't do it, it's not organic, you know. And so I went into nature and by myself and took it, and I understood then that ecstasy is literally only able to be felt when the heart is open. And it is that feeling and the sense there is no fear, and you feel at one with everything. I mean, this was my experience, you know, complete calmness and then at one with everything. Oh, and by the way, and I also there are the ones that are where there's another substance in there called speed that makes the heart beat. That's terrible. And when I experienced that, it's like, oh, that is terrible. And then it came to me. I didn't even look for it. It came to me in a way that I just had to say, yep, okay, you know, put the money there, and I could even afford it. And it was without the speed. So, and I didn't do it often. And for some reason, I needed to do that to remind me, and also to remind me, and also to show me it's not the organic thing and it's not the solution. You know, to numb yourself or to take drugs always has a backlog, always has a backlash, because it's with force, and then whatever the side effects are on the body that I don't even know. But there always is when you take a chemical and that forces your body to do something that it wouldn't do out of its own. That's the difference to, for example, Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine, which is not by force. That is supports the body in its own intelligence. It just gives the body resources to use. It is the resources it needs, you know, but the body can use them. It's not something that creates force on the body. Force always has repercussions because it doesn't come from the truth. It comes from the divide. Yeah. So we have the Sasquatch and the whales that are and the dolphins, so the cetaceans, because also the orcas same, but they have a little bit of they definitely not a little bit, they have a different experiential mind paradigm and also role to play. But they are multidimensional beings, as in that sense that they can open portals and go back and forth. Yes, so the heart field communication, that is the communication of the soul. It's the soul communicating, and I experienced this with the Sasquatch. Oh, how did I realize it was a Sasquatch? So I remember that I went to swim with the dolphins with Joan Ocean, and many years later, I looked up on the internet. I was thinking about Joan Ocean and thinking about, oh, I wonder what she's been up to and what she's up to these days. And I went to look on her page, and there I found that Joan Ocean had been visiting her friends somewhere in, I don't know, Canada, I think, I don't know, but they lived close to a forest, and those friends had contact with Sasquatch, and when she was there, she also then for the first time had contact with Sasquatch. And she relayed about all of her experiences, all the communications. There were notes written by Sasquatch. There were little, twigs that are woven in a certain way, that were like tokens given by the Sasquatch. and then the communications that she had with them, you know. So I was reading this. I had never heard of Sasquatch. The only thing I had heard of was this German Reinhold Messner, who is a famous, like, he climbed the Mount Everest, and so mountain climber. And I remember when he came back from like climbing Mount Everest, and that's when he became famous. And he came into a talk show in the 80s, and I think at least it was the late 80s, beginning 90s, and he talked about meeting, you know, open on like one of the, not just talk show, it was like a game show where they had famous people come, and he was sitting there and he was speaking about the Yeti, you know, which I thought that was phenomenal. It was unheard of, you know, it was very rare that someone would open up that much and not be, you know, because they would immediately make themselves subject to ridicule. That's just how it, you know, that's just how it is still. When you talk about these kind of extraordinary, extra-dimensional, or, you know, things that are like magical or mystical, and something that science hasn't, you know, put its stamp on and says, yes, it's real. And, you know, and especially because the existence of these beings, you know, there is an intention there behind the inverted matrix to keep that hidden, you know, to keep that hidden. And so that's the only time that I had heard of that kind of a being, and then that it was the same kind of like species, even though a different group, different cultural, but the same species as Sasquatch. That's when I heard that name for the first time, Sasquatch, even, or read it. And so I was reading through this, and something happened. Something was like a completely new paradigm opened up, because I knew this was real. I was getting it from Joan, and I knew this was real. You know, before, when there would be people, when you would hear here and there about Atlantis, and, you know, this mountaineer about Yeti, it was always like, is that what he really saw? Do they really exist? And then it's kind of like somewhere way in the background, like in the mystical, but you don't know. But here I was confronted and knew, oh my God, they really exist. And it opened up a new paradigm for me. And it was, again, this feeling of magic, you know, like, oh, diving deeper into the world is getting more magical. Yes. And then I came towards, and I was looking up, and I looked for it, and I came to Mike Peterson's channel, Sasquatch Ontario, and he had actual recordings of Sasquatch vocals, and I listened to them. And the first times, but it's actually almost every time still, but especially the first time I heard these vocals, I burst into a deep tears, sobbing. Really, it was a deep crying, you know, crying from my soul, like as if it was like a remembering that they existed, and of them, as if I knew them. And it's like, it was a deep stirring of my soul when I heard this, and there was no question that it was real. It was absolutely real, yeah. And just if you're interested, on my my other channel, Temple of Innocence, there is a and you can see that on my channel, my other channel, when you scroll down on the first page, Temple of Innocence, and there's a playlist called Beyond Ordinary Reality, and the first video is this little sound bite of, he's called Nefertia, of that Sasquatch. And what it does is it expands our mind out of this tight little box of this ordinary reality that we were conditioned into. And this makes also space for more soul to come through. Yeah. And yes, and what I wanted to say is that when we open up our heart field and then we become conducive, or we can conductors to the higher frequencies, and when it comes to the heart and connects into the body, you know, there is that ability to feel ecstatic, to have these ecstatic also feelings, or bliss. So those are like the highest spins that are being able to be hosted into our physical body. And the inverted forces, they are not able, absolutely not able to have these feelings and to experience this. And they, you know, they, from the inverted spin, that of course is total suffering. And so that they can relieve, they're like totally addicted. They're addicted to the other's fear. Why is that? Because, you know, also it's like the men from the book Momo, addicted to the cigarettes, stealing time. You know, they steal time, they steal energy. Again, because they can't generate it on their own, but they can only metabolize it as in a dense form, in the form where the soul is squeezed out, where the soul is suppressed and depressed. And so what, and the drug that they take is that the more suffering, so that the greater the suffering of someone else, it is a drug for them. Yeah, and that is the only thing that will relieve them from their own suffering. That's the thing. So to feel someone else's suffering is their drug, because it's the only thing that will numb their own suffering. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's about code. Why they can't take the light, because they don't have the code for it. It would, you know, it has to be a match to their frequency, to their code. So they have to, the way that they assimilate another's light is by this creating spaces and creating situations that will induce, you know, suffering for us or for the other. Then yeah, so right, okay, so now we come to the, what does this have to do with the Christ consciousness, with the golden child, with creativity? And then, you know, this is the last part. So my pa had gifted me a dolphin. He made it himself, and that was, you know, it was my favorite. It was so beautiful. I loved it so much, and I wore it all the time. And at some point in my life, again, when I was in a phase that was very, very dark, and where I numbed myself through it was cannabis. So I was numbing myself, and in that phase, in that time, oh God, I'm getting dizzy again. It was stolen from me. So that's also interesting. It's like that part of the magical child that was, you know, that was a representation. The dolphin is a representation of that, of play, you know, child's play. And child doesn't, you know, it is where that is still there, that magical mind, that open mind to soul, yeah. And it was stolen. So it was like, it could be stolen because I was shut down, because I was numb, because I was unconscious. And I felt so bad about it. I didn't tell him for many years. And then when I told him couple years ago, what he did was he had made a second one for his wife, and him and his wife decided that they wanted me to have it, and he sent it to me, and it came as a surprise. And when I opened up the package, and it's the same mold that mine was made of, so when I opened up the package, I first saw this, and that's how mine looked. And I was shocked. I was in tears. I was just like so touched. And then I turned it around, because I hadn't even seen that. Oops. And do you see that? It has a golden baby that's, attached to it. A golden baby. And when I saw that, it was like, oh my God. And I got all the from my soul, I got all the code that this is about giving birth to yourself, your magical child, your golden child. And this is the thing, when we are children, it's unconscious. It's not yet embodied. It's because, we have it by grace. It's because we're still, like the babies, they still have the head open. The crown chakra is actually physically, the fontanella is still open. We're still so connected to our soul, and then it gets drained out and squeezed out through the platform that, this has been, that our world has been. And it is only when we lose something, and then, and that's how we can lose it, by the way, because we're unconscious of it. It's just there, but we have no awareness of it. So yes, we have a different perception because there's more soul there, but it is not an awareness of, how should I explain this? We have no conscious awareness of who we are. And it has not married, okay, this is what's coming exactly. Then this is going to lead into this. It has not been married yet into and merged with the physical DNA, the DNA of the ancestry, because what we're bringing in, this soul, that is our soul DNA. Yeah? But until that gets embodied, it's unconscious, and it can be easily, that's the naivete, it can be taken from us, and that's what's been happening in this matrix, in this inverted matrix, and that's the only way that we can be controlled and can be kept as hosts, just like in the movie, the trilogy, The Matrix, by the Wachowski then brothers. Because that is the perfect image of it exactly shows how the principles of our system, of this inverted matrix system, which is the lowest that the earth has gone, and now has come, it already has come. It's the turning point of the ascension. Okay, so now we come to so we give birth to ourselves, to our golden child, and that is the conscious remembering of soul, and that is when it has been embodied. That is when the nervous system in this body can hold that light. And so what also happens is, how did I write this? Yes. we pick the density of the DNA, we liberate the DNA, because the most valuable DNA, exactly. So we come in here as the wherever our soul is at, we come into this dense DNA, into this dense field, we pick that up and we liberate it back into the light. Because all that trauma that has been inflicted on every single one of our ancestry lines, we pick that up, we take that on. And by awakening and bringing our soul through, and we can only do that if it has been taken away. Because if we come in and there is no trauma in your, well, then there would be no trauma in your DNA. But if you take on a DNA that is traumatic, that has density in it, to pick that up, you have to go into that density. You have to, how are you going to reach it? It's like going down into the dungeons and liberating the aspects of yourself that are still stuck in that traumatic moment. It's like when the shamans or the grid workers go around Earth to these special places, certain places, specific, where they're guided to go, and where there are lost souls. They're still hanging in that realm. They're not liberated yet. They haven't been able to move on from that trauma. And also there was no, it's like they were kept in a prison, so that those parasitical inverted forces that created this matrix system, so that they could continue to feed off of their suffering, and so and they liberate that. And it's the same with our memory and with our ancestral memory that then expresses in us. And when we can bring that, and when we can heal that, because we bring it back into the light of our awareness, and we can hold space for it in our heart field, we can be present with it. That's what recalibrates it and spins out, takes it from the inverted spin back into the organic spin. And now it's part of the family. Now it can come home. Now it can continue its revolutionary currents. It's not stuck anymore in a place, because there is really no death. It's all the transformation. But what is death is the belief, is actually when you're stuck in suffering, because otherwise death is just a moment. It's that moment of going over the threshold of leaving one dimension and being born, or waking up, or becoming aware of yourself in the next. It's that walking over that threshold. Yes. And a DNA line, or a bloodline, also called, that has experienced going deep into density and then being liberated, coming back into the light. So, that is a so-called ascended bloodline, or ascended DNA, which is like the bloodline of Christ Jesus is an ascended bloodline, because he ascended. After going very deep, but not forgetting about himself, not forgetting and falling asleep. He stayed awake, even though there was a moment of challenge. But he stayed awake. He was able to keep his awake consciousness. That is the most valuable DNA, because that's a whole other video, which I won't go into now. The most valuable DNA ascension DNA must descend for, in order to ascend, you have to descend first. Yes. And that's because it can embody the light at a very, very, like it can bring the light, a lot of light into a dense physicality. Yes. So, and that is ecstasy. So it is that is exactly, now we come back to ecstasy. So it creates the ability for the most blissful, ecstatic life experience and expression of life, of the divine. That is what the ascended DNA enables. And then the last thing I got was that just those two dots that connected was that, you always hear that the most nefarious in our galaxy, the beings, the humanoid beings, that their race that fell the lowest and that had like the biggest hand in the game of creating the inverted matrix, and have been apparently the greatest parasitical inverted force on this planet, and creating the inverted system, have been the Draco. And what I just remember from the Draco, from Dan Winter explained this, is that they are also the race that has experienced the greatest destruction and the greatest trauma in this galaxy. That all has to do with the Orion Wars. And what stuck with me was that their planet was destroyed, and a certain weapon was used, and it was so terrible that it split their hearts, so that the next generation actually had two hearts. So, similar to how our brain has left and right hemisphere only connected by a little bridge in the middle, and that bridge, is like when we go into 0 point, when we still our mind, then we can sync up the two hemispheres, which is why that's also so important to always come back into, that stillness of the mind, so that we come back into balance. And that also has to do with wholeness, and they have two hearts. And so mutation, it was like a negative mutation, or so meaning negative mutation was a mutation coming through an outer an outer impact that wasn't natural. And then I thought it was interesting because simultaneously I also keep heard from several sources, I can't even mention them all, that the highest beings of our harmonic universe, or I don't know if it is our galaxy that is meant by that. I'm not 100% sure if it's meant by in our Milky Way galaxy, but like the highest form that a mind, body, soul, consciousness complex can reach and express within one form is a dragon. The dragon luminaries. So you have kind of like the lowest density and the highest light form being both no, that's not the right word, but dragon-like, where that DNA of dragon is held. Even though at the same time, also from Dan Winter, that I recall, and this also then shows in the way that we see those high, the good dragons, which is also the dragon lines, the ley lines that are dragon lines, and they're part of what we would call the nature spirit realm. And they used to also come here, and fly these lines, and just like the whales have their lines and the song lines of also the Aborigines, and these are all it's like trails, energy trails full of code, full of beautiful frequency and melody and so forth. The way they look, you know, and they have not only dragon DNA, so that's serpent DNA, but they also have, it's like a trifecta. They have dragon, dog, canine, and bird, avian. So canine, avian, dragon. And that is, when you look at the Chinese dragons, they have a dog face and they have plumes, you know, and it totally makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So that's some inspiration for today.